Hello and welcome to another online sociology lesson. This is the face that you pull when you realize this is our last lesson in education. This is the 2010 onwards education policies, and this is kind of looking at how the idea of marketization has continued into this decade and beyond. This picture is of two people. On the left you have Nick Clegg, and on the right you have David Cameron. Now, David Cameron was the Prime Minister from 2010. He was the leader of the Conservative Party, but they didn't get a big enough majority in the election to form their own government. They had to have a coalition, an alliance with Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats. So this is their first news conference together, and Nick Clegg was the leader of the Liberal Democrats and the Deputy Prime Minister. And this sort of lesson is all about the policies that the Conservative and Liberal Democrat Party combined introduced, and then later, when it just became a Conservative Party and Liberal Democrats lost out in the next election, just the Conservative only policies. Okay, so it's kind of all of the Tory policies from 2010 onwards, essentially. This we're going to call closing the gap. Okay, there's a big emphasis at the moment about closing the gap in schools, and I'll talk about what that looks like in a bit more detail, but the GAP is the acronym we are using for this set of policies. So we've had SHOP, the 1988 Education Reform Act, SAFE for the Labour Party's 1997 policies, and then closing the gap for the 2010 policies onwards. To start with, something that you will be very familiar with. In 2016, the Conservative government, and this was Michael Gove, who was the Education Secretary at the time, introduced a new system of GCSEs. So the first change was that we'd lose the old A star to G system, which was familiar with a lot of people for a number of years. And we would introduce a number-based system where a 4 would look like an old C and a 9 would be like an A star star. So it's kind of a much more grades in this new system than the old one. And it was done for a number of reasons. I'm not going to go into why today because it's not a huge kind of thing that we need to focus on. But the main thing that we do need to focus on is that we also saw a massive reduction in coursework from a lot of subjects. Okay, not all subjects, there are still some that examine using coursework, but most subjects now examine simply with exams. Okay, 100% exam-based subjects, and you will take these at the end of your GCSE course, at the end of year 11. This is a big change. Previously, we have had some courses which have a combination of coursework and examination, and some which are more exam focused, and students got to choose a GCSE course based on, you know, how much coursework there was, if they were somebody who maybe found exams a bit tougher. The reason they've done this, and they've also increased the challenge and the academic rigor of the new specification, is to try and raise national academic standards. Okay, so it's about making exams tougher, making them full of more content, making them harder to learn and master and complete, which means that when we come to an exam, we overall are better than years previously because we know more and we can do more and we can show that more in an exam. Okay, the idea is raising the standards of education across the whole country. The criticisms of this new change is that people say often it punishes people who find exams harder, or it punishes those who have a disadvantage in terms of language or reading and writing ability in comparison to their peers. Kind of whereas coursework could be completed over a number of weeks and you could get kind of help on making it better, your exams are 1 day, 1 hour, you and the paper, and that's it. And those who maybe find that tougher or who get a bit more anxious about them or stressed might do worse than their peers. So a lot of criticisms of this new approach, but the government wanted to do it to try and raise academic standards in the country. It's up to you to decide whether or not you think that's worked. So that's the G. The A is something we've seen a lot in the last policies, and we'll see again, it's academies. Okay, there have been academies in every single one of the policies from 1988 all the way to 2010. But in 2010 onwards, there has been a huge rise in academies and free schools. Okay, and these have been replacing failing state schools. The thing to remember about both academies and free schools is that they get individually more control over how they run their school than if they were a state school. Okay, so academies and free schools are both funded by local government, but academies are also funded by businesses or charities. Free schools on the right-hand side are funded by local government, but they're run by a group of parents or teachers or a business or even a religious group. Okay, so free schools are not actually run by local government, they're just funded by local government, they're run by local people. Both of them do not have to follow the national curriculum. So even though it was brought in 1988 to try and raise academic standards, the government are now saying that the schools who want to can actually move away from the national curriculum. And what this does is this offers greater choice to parents. They can send their child to the local state school, which will follow the national curriculum, or they can send their child to the local academy, which doesn't. And that's increasing parentocracy. The main thing that these schools have, aside from the national curriculum not being compulsory, is that they also have a lot more control over how they pay their staff, how much they pay their staff, the length of the school day and holidays and term times. So an academy, if they wanted to, could make the school day a whole hour longer or a whole hour shorter, or they could change when they do their half term. They could have 2 weeks for half term in October rather than just one. And there's quite a few academies that are doing that. So it's about giving a lot more control over to the school to make it more appealing to parents in the local area, okay, increasing the idea of the market and the competition between schools. So you've got new GCSEs and academies, and the P in GAP, the P in GAP stands for Pupil Premium, which we'll come to in a second, because I forgot I've got this slide in as well. This is a map of a town which we've seen before in previous lessons. I just want you to imagine the impact that academies and free schools would have on a local area. So you've got the state school, which at the moment all children go to. If you have more academies and more free schools in the 10-mile radius cropping up over the next few years, you've got more choice for parents. And again, you're increasing parentocracy. You're increasing the power that parents have over which school their children can go to. As we know from Bull, Bow and Gurwitz, this is a middle class advantage, because those parents, middle class parents, often have a greater choice over where their children go to school than working class parents. So the criticisms of increasing academies is always going to be that criticism given to us by Bull, Bow and Gurwitz that middle class parents win here more than working class parents do. Finally, the P in GAP, Pupil Premium. Okay, we've talked about this in the past. This is one of the policies introduced to try and close the gap between advantaged and disadvantaged students. You know, you've seen this in previous lessons, that disadvantaged pupils, those from low-income backgrounds, those who suffer from material deprivation, often perform lower academically than their peers do at school, and often have higher rates of things like exclusion and punishment within school. So we need to find a way of closing the gap between advantaged and disadvantaged people, children in the school. Pupil Premium is the government's latest scheme to try and do this, and this still is going on in schools today. It was introduced in 2011, and as you know, as you've seen before, schools directly are given money for every student they enroll from a lower income household. Okay, so if a school enrolled 10 children or 20 children from a low income family, that school, not that children, okay, the school itself gets the money. that school would be given extra funding that would be expected to be spent on that child. Okay, so imagine children walking around a school with a kind of pound sign above their head. And if you are from a advantaged household that's got a higher income, your pound sign would be slightly smaller because the school gets a little bit less money to spend on you, because the idea is that you have that money at home. If you are a child from a lower income family, the pound sign above your head is a little bit larger because the school gets a bit more money to spend on you, because what the idea is that if child 1 has more input from home and child 2 has less financial input from home, then by giving the school that extra bit of money, they can try and close that gap between them. Okay, and this is being spent on things like textbooks, exercise books, uniform, even help with things like school trips. If there is a trip going to another country and a child from a lower income family wanted to go on it but couldn't afford to, that's how the school would use their pupil premium funding to help that child with it. Okay, so it's about closing the financial gap, which in turn we hope will close the academic gap, because remember how closely linked material deprivation is to academic performance. Those who have more money generally do better. Okay, so it's about closing the financial gap and then obviously closing by extension the academic gap. Okay, so you've got your 3 policies: new GCSEs, more academies, we love the academies, they keep coming, every single policy, and pupil premium. Okay, and if we were to summarize not just this section of policies, but all 3 of them from 1988 onwards, they would look like this. Okay, so 1988, the Education Reform Act. If you remember one set of policies, and that's it, this is the one. Education Reform Act. Shop for schools. Parents get to shop around for the best school to send their children to. And the 4 main policies involved in shop: school league tables, where schools are ranked on how well they do; Her Majesty's inspectors, also known as Ofsted, who judge and evaluate schools; open days, where parents get to walk around and see the school. All 3 of these result in parentocracy, parents having more power over where their children go to school. This, as we know, favours the middle class parents more. 1997, and this is in red because red is the colour of the Labour Party. Blue represents the Conservatives, okay? So the red ones: education, education, education. That is putting children in safe hands, keeping children safe in education for longer. The SAFE stands for Sure Start schools, which is the ones in low-income areas, which are boosting the maths, the English, skills of low-income children. More academies, because we love the academies. Free childcare for all preschool children, getting more women back into work. And EMAs, where you were paid to go to college. Madness. Educational maintenance allowance. EMAs is fine for short. Okay. 2010, closing the gap. New GCSEs, 9-1 rather than A star to G. More exams, less coursework. Academies, pupil premium. Okay, closing that gap between advantaged and disadvantaged children. These are all of your education policies. Okay, and you can still use the same criticisms from Bull, Bow and Gurwitz across all of them, because certainly the Tory ones are increasing marketisation. Bull, Bow and Gurwitz say the working class lose out. Okay, so if you are ever in doubt of how to talk about education policies in sociology, in the sociology of education, focus on these 3 main things. Number 1, the Education Reform Act is your first point of call. That's the first thing you talk about as the actual legal policy. 1988 Education Reform Act. Number 2, the overall flavour of policies, at least in the Tory years, so 1988 and 2010, has been increased marketisation. Okay, so Education Reform Act, marketisation. That's your point. That's your explanation. Okay, so you've got the kind of the point and the evidence of here's the actual act, here is your evidence, explanation, increased marketization. Okay, this is about increasing the competition between schools to raise academic performance. The third thing you need to remember, so Education Reform Act, marketization, is our criticisms from Ball, Bow and Gurwitz. The idea that actually all of this just serves the middle class more than it does the working class, because they are able to shop around for schools more for all the reasons we've spoken about in the past, which actually doesn't close the gap, it increases the gap between the middle and the working class children. That is all of your education policies, and that brings us to the end of the sociology of education topic. Okay, well done. Make some notes on closing the gap. Remember those 3 points: Education Reform Act, marketization, Ball, Bow and Gurwitz. They are the 3 main points you need to focus on, and well done. See you later.